It was the final months of 1944, and the skies over northern France thundered with the fury of war. The Allies, pushing relentlessly toward Germany, had taken the village of Saint-Hilaire, and the Germans, retreating in disarray, were no match for the advancing forces. But among the devastation, something extraordinary happened. A British officer, who had witnessed countless battles, made a decision that would reverberate far beyond the front lines. He allowed his German prisoners of war, men who had been enemies moments before, to attend the funeral of a local villager. In the heat of war, where every moment was a matter of life or death, where soldiers fought to the bitter end for their cause, this act of compassion shocked both sides. The prisoners, who had been marched through the streets, their heads bowed in defeat, were given an unexpected moment of humanity. The year is 1944. Europe is deep in the throes of World War II, and the German military is on the defensive. The Allies, having landed on the beaches of Normandy, are pushing through France at a breakneck pace, liberating village after village from German control. At the heart of this relentless advance is the British Army, led by officers who must balance the brutality of war with the ethics of their station. In the small, war-torn village of Saint-Hilaire, a story unfolds that would challenge the very foundations of warfare. The sounds of artillery fire still echo in the distance as British forces secure the area, capturing a group of German soldiers. These prisoners, once part of the Nazi war machine, are now part of the very war they fought so hard to win. To the British soldiers, they are nothing more than captured enemies, likely to face harsh treatment and a grim future in a POW camp. But among the officers is one who sees something more, a chance to break the cycle of hatred that defines war. Lieutenant Colonel James Foster, a seasoned officer with a reputation for both toughness and compassion, faces a difficult decision. He knows that the war is tearing apart not just the land, but the souls of those involved. In the village, a beloved local man has passed away, and the villagers are preparing for his funeral. The grief is palpable, not just for the loss of a neighbor, but for the lives shattered by the brutality of the ongoing conflict. It is a moment of solemnity, a brief pause from the brutality of the world outside. As Foster walks through the desolate streets of the village, he sees the carnage of war, shattered windows, collapsed homes, and the faces of men, women, and children marked by suffering. Yet he also sees a community that has not been broken entirely. Amidst the ruins, the villagers are determined to honor the life of the man they have lost. Foster makes a decision that seems impossible. He will allow his German prisoners to attend the funeral. This act of compassion, seemingly small in the context of a global conflict, challenges the very nature of war. It is a risky decision, one that could be seen as weakness or even betrayal of his comrades. Yet for Foster, it represents a sliver of hope that in the midst of this chaos, humanity might still find a way to shine through. This act, though simple, sets off a series of events that will test the limits of compassion and humanity in the face of war. Word of Lieutenant Colonel Foster's decision spreads rapidly through the ranks. His fellow officers, hardened by the brutal realities of war, react with disbelief. To some, Foster's act is an absurdity, allowing enemy soldiers, prisoners of war, to stand in the very heart of a French village, among the people they had just tried to subjugate. How could he afford them such dignity? The Allies are supposed to be a force of liberation, not one of leniency. These men had fought for the Third Reich, the very power responsible for countless atrocities. How could he, in good conscience, allow them to honor a dead civilian, a symbol of the very life they sought to destroy? Yet for others under Foster's command, the act is one of quiet admiration. They have witnessed too much of the inhumanity of war. Towns burned to the ground, families torn apart, comrades lost in battle. To show mercy, even to the enemy, seems like a chance to restore something broken in the world, a single moment of decency in the relentless march of violence. They wonder, could this act of mercy help heal the wounds of war, if only for a moment? The prisoners themselves are stunned by the offer. These are soldiers who have known little but the brutality of war, who have fought not just for their country, but for an ideology steeped in hatred and violence. Now, standing in the shadow of their captors, they are given an unexpected gift, the chance to pay their respects, not as enemies, but as human beings. However, the tension rises as the moment approaches. Foster is reminded of the constant threat of war. The British Army's higher command is not made up of men who hold such sentimental views. They will see this act as an unnecessary risk, a breach of military decorum. What if the prisoners decided to escape, or worse, use this moment of kindness to turn the tables? Foster's comrades, despite their admiration, feel the weight of potential consequences. For some, there is a sense of unease, of danger, knowing that such a gesture might be seen as weakness by the enemy and could be exploited. At the same time, the villagers of Saint-Hilaire are unsure how to react. Their lives have been forever altered by the war. They have seen the brutality of the occupying German forces, witnessed the suffering of their neighbors, and lost loved ones in the conflict. The presence of the German prisoners at the funeral feels like a violation, a reminder of the forces that have torn apart their community. Yet, in the face of such devastation, they are also hesitant to reject the idea of humanity. This village, much like the soldiers and prisoners in it, has been shattered. Can a single act of compassion undo the years of hardship? Or will this only serve to reopen old wounds? As the funeral begins, the soldiers, both British and German, stand in a tense silence. The villagers, their faces still marked by grief, cast wary glances at the prisoners. For a moment, the ceremony feels like a fragile truce, a brief pause in the ongoing conflict. The coffin is lowered into the earth, and the villagers, their emotions raw, pay their final respects to the man who once lived among them. The British officers stand silently observing the scene, as the prisoners, standing off to the side, do the same. But what they didn't know was that the tension was about to escalate. The very moment that some believed would offer closure and compassion had the potential to fracture the delicate balance they had fought to create. A decision was about to be made, one that would either reaffirm or destroy the fragile humanity they had dared to acknowledge. As the funeral service draws to a close, the atmosphere becomes increasingly tense. The villagers, though silent in their grief, can't shake off the uneasy presence of the German prisoners standing nearby. The British soldiers, too, are watching with a mixture of respect and suspicion. For a brief moment, everything seems to hang in the balance. The prayer is spoken, the last rites given, and the sound of the church bells tolling feels like an echo of something lost forever. Yet in this stillness, there is also something unexpected, an undercurrent of unity. Foster, standing at the back of the gathered crowd, watches with a sense of quiet resolution. His decision has put him on a precarious edge. He sees the flicker of doubt in the eyes of his men, feels the weight of judgment from his superiors back at headquarters, and knows that the delicate fabric of this moment could unravel at any second. But then, something remarkable happens. One of the prisoners, a young German soldier, steps forward. His face is solemn, his expression unreadable. Slowly he places a hand over his heart, bowing his head in an unspoken gesture of respect. It's a small act, almost imperceptible, but it speaks volumes. The other prisoners follow suit, their rigid stances loosening as they mimic the gesture. It is not just a display of submission. It is a moment of shared humanity, a fleeting recognition of the common thread that binds them all: loss, grief, and the absurdity of war. For a split second, the world seems to hold its breath. The British soldiers exchange glances, unsure of what to make of this quiet show of respect. The villagers, too, are taken aback. The tension which had gripped the ceremony begins to soften. The funeral, once a simple act of closure for a community torn apart by war, now takes on a new meaning. It becomes a fleeting symbol of what might have been, a momentary cessation of the violence that had scarred so many lives. But just as the villagers begin to let their guard down, the sound of distant gunfire shatters the calm. The familiar roar of artillery rises in the distance, a reminder that war is never far, that the brief truce Foster had sought to establish was just a fragile illusion. The prisoners, still standing in place, are immediately reminded of their status as captives. The British soldiers, too, are jolted back to reality. Foster, who had allowed the prisoners this moment of dignity, now faces the consequences of his act. There is a sudden movement among the soldiers. One of the British officers steps forward, his face tight with concern. He has no interest in the moral implications of Foster's decision. His focus is on the practicality of the moment. "It's time to move them," he says coldly, his voice cutting through the fragile peace that had settled over the graveyard. Foster hesitates. For the briefest moment, he wonders whether this decision will cost him more than just his career. Will it cost him his soul? But the British officer, seeing the hesitation, presses on. "Orders are orders," he adds, his voice now laced with urgency. The prisoners are quickly escorted away, their moment of humanity cut short by the cold, unyielding machinery of war. The villagers, who had just begun to understand the complexity of the situation, are left to grapple with their own feelings of betrayal, of discomfort, of a war that will never let them forget the past. As the prisoners are marched away, the air grows heavy with unsaid words. Foster watches them go, his chest tight with frustration. He knows that what he had hoped for, a moment of grace, of understanding, was now lost. But in that fleeting moment, when the prisoners had stood beside the villagers, there was a glimmer of something more than just the war they were fighting. It was a brief acknowledgement that perhaps, in a world defined by violence, there could still be space for something better. The days following the funeral are filled with the usual routines of war, preparations for the next battle, the relentless march toward the enemy. But for Lieutenant Colonel Foster, the consequences of his actions are immediate. His superiors, upon hearing of the funeral incident, call him into their office. His decision to allow the German prisoners to attend the funeral has drawn sharp criticism. Some view it as a violation of military protocol, an unnecessary act of compassion in a world where mercy has no place. Others argue that it was a dangerous gesture that could have been exploited by the enemy. Foster is relieved of his command, and his career, built over years of military service, begins to unravel. He is sent back to England, his reputation forever tainted by the controversy surrounding his decision. His peers, many of whom had supported him in the moment, now avoid him, unsure of how to reconcile his actions with the brutal realities of war. Some see him as a man who sought to preserve his humanity in a world that had lost it, while others label him as naive, a soldier who let his moral compass override his duty. In the years that follow, Foster rarely speaks of the incident, but when he does, it is always with a quiet sense of pride, tempered by the realization that his decision came with a cost. He knows that in the grand scheme of the war, his actions were but a fleeting moment, a small footnote in a global conflict that claimed millions of lives. Yet for those who witnessed the funeral in Saint-Hilaire, it remains a story that transcends the violence of war. The German prisoners, too, are eventually shipped to a POW camp, their fates sealed by the ongoing war. But for that brief moment, they were more than just soldiers of an enemy nation. They were human beings, caught in the same web of suffering and loss as the villagers and soldiers around them. And the villagers of Saint-Hilaire, though they continued to rebuild their lives in the shadow of war, never forgot the moment when their enemy had stood beside them, not as invaders, but as fellow mourners. As the years passed, the memory of that day lingered, a reminder that, even in the darkest of times, humanity could still find a way to reach across the divide, to offer something more than just hatred and violence. In the silence that followed, the ocean remembered everything.